Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. We've got a guest today all the way from Montreal, Carl Boutet, who is founder and chief strategist at Studio RX, also known as the Retail Prescriptor. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Simon. Thanks for inviting me. This is a real privilege.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. So before we dive into the detail around productivity and automation and the role of manual workers in the future, just for those that may be not familiar with you, Carl, can you give us a bit of a career kind of history biog? You're an author as well, so maybe just get a reference in there to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty diversified 25-year professional history, but usually always ties back to some shape or form of retail. I had my own business for a better part of a decade where I built the first national or pan-Canadian retail network for wireless, for cell phone national retail network. Had 60 locations, mostly with in partnership with Costco wholesale. So that really was my true schooling around the day-to-day realities of running a large retail operation. And then basically pivoted to different shapes and forms of consulting, advisory work. So I spent a lot of time with I went from the very large to supporting a group of several hundred independent retailers, again, mostly here in Canada, but then began spreading out globally. And also been taking on more and more advisory work with technology companies that are looking to support and better understand the needs of those retailers. And during the pandemic, I've added another feather in my cap around academia and teaching. So I teach at the Executive Institute here at McGill University. I teach marketing at their mini MBA program. And I also now teach marketing at the MBA level at the Asian Institute of Technology, based out of Bangkok. So a pretty diverse spread there, but always with the focus on sort of what's coming, or trying to stay at least up to speed, but ideally even looking a little further ahead. And that brought me to writing the book, a self-published project that we can get into later because it's a bit different than a traditional book concept, but titled The Great Acceleration, The Race to Retail Resilience, where I basically coined the term the Great Acceleration early in the pandemic as the word acceleration was coming up more and more, especially during the first lockdowns. And I sort of came to this a notion that we would look back on this period as a period of great acceleration, and some of the other frameworks in there that I had already been tossing around over the last couple of years. So that's kind of a quick way of saying 25 years of what I've been up to.
Excellent. So yeah, no, I mean, again, from me, massive respect for writing a book. I think it's an amazing thing to do. You must be really proud of it. And, you know, when you sit back and look at all the things you've documented, it's not an easy task that anybody who's written one tells me.
Yeah. So, I mean, the book process, just to get into that a bit more, and I put, we're audio here, so the air quotes are being missed, but I always put sort of book in quotes because the project was initiated like 5 years ago, really, during a dinner where we were with business school classmates and teachers. It was a catch up. It was like a 15-year, I think, anniversary at that point. And my business strategy professor, who I really admired and stayed close to, we spent the whole dinner sort of just jamming and talking about all the sort of dynamics in the markets. And he's like, "You got a book in you." And I I didn't really know what that meant, and sort of kind of was perplexed by that statement, but came away by saying, it's true that I talk about a lot of different things, mostly around how to remain relevant, how businesses need to adapt to change, and started sort of working out some frameworks that I had in my mind, and kept on sort of evolving, and God went from this notion of relevance to notion of sustainability, which I talk about as well, sustainability flywheel, and then with the pandemic and acceleration, and the fact that I was just coming back from Asia at that point when the pandemic, I just really was just ahead of tsunami. I was actually in Shanghai mid-January 2020. So without a clue that I was just in front of this precipice, basically, but it kept me close to and sort of kept me even ahead a bit of the wave, because I was able to stay close to the businesses out there and the others that were sort of dealing with the pandemic as it was making its way to us. So it helped me better prepare my clients as well, and that's sort of all this things that kind of pulled together to create this project, is what I call this book project, which is really a collaborative effort. I mean, I obviously built the principles around it, but I called on a lot of support. There's a lot of interviews in the book, and it's a small book. I mean, it's a quick read. The idea is that it instigates a larger sort of always evolving project, because a book is, yes, I mean, in the classical sense, is a very large and endeavor that can take up a long time, even just to get to publishing. And at the speed things are going today, I felt like it had to be something a little more agile. So I just put out there, self-published, self-financed, this document. There's a digital and physical version of it, but the biggest idea is that it's going to be an ongoing project where the data is going to constantly be updated, and new interviews are going to be added, and we're going to keep thinking about the impacts of the acceleration, and that's what makes the project a little different than most.
Amazing. So with that in mind then, and this whole piece around retailers staying relevant and the speed of change and having to deal with change, our world is productivity, and we do lots of measurement and analysis and benchmarking and insight into that. So do you think as we move forward then, the way we will think about productivity and how we measure it's going to change and evolve?
Absolutely. So a big part of the acceleration, and especially, the first wave would be in the UK or North America or anywhere. I mean, the thing that really jumped out to everybody, and it was almost like a portal into the future, was, how much of the customer journey became digitized. And so with a focus, obviously, the easy one is e-commerce, but not just e-commerce. There's a lot of other touch points that became more digital. And this is not to say that the physical lost its relevance. Quite the opposite. I think the physical actually had even a greater opportunity to show its value. But how you measure that productivity and what makes you successful, that's accelerated as well. Because what we had to realize with the acceleration is that, and when I say a portal into the future, it's because we saw all sorts of data points in the spring of 2020 that we were expecting to see 10 years from now, around e-commerce volume, around curbside pickup, and not because it all overnight became that much more interesting. It just because of the way that the different lockdowns and the different ways that we could access the product and services basically changed overnight. So it forced us into these new habits that we knew weren't going to stay. So we went back, and in most markets reverted, not completely back to the way we were. I think some elements have stuck, but it still showed us sort of how unprepared we were for what was coming, could be coming in what we thought was 10 years, and now happening a lot more quickly. So how we measure the success and how we measure what makes us productive had to really, I think, came under fire, because the biggest challenge is these measurements that create silos in our organizations that doesn't reflect the reality of what that acceleration showed us.
One of the things, just to pick up on what you said, and it's puzzled me to a degree since lockdown, is one of the things that historically got in the way corporate governance, politics, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, because we went, certainly in the UK, overnight pretty much with our first very, very strict lockdown, from people having things, and you said kind of that 10-year journey on their tech roadmap, process roadmap, that they managed to do in 3 days. So they managed to start picking from store and delivering via Deliveroo in 3 days, or spinning up a home delivery service. So do you think that's one of the things that's been unlocked, is people cutting through layers and layers of sign-off bureaucracy, and actually, when needs must, the agile, minimum viable product iterations from there has helped us drive that productivity step forward.
Absolutely, and it's interesting you use those time frames, because I remember last summer and hearing an interview with the chairman and former CEO of Best Buy, which basically, they'd been tossing around curbside pickup pilot projects left and right, and nobody could really agree on sort of the way they wanted to go about it. And then literally in 3 days, to your point, had to roll it out, because in the Northeast US, especially, where they had those severe lockdowns too, as much as we had here in Canada. But I think for them, the financial repercussions were more important in places like New York, where people were everybody was jumping on home office equipment, which became a top seller for Best Buy. And it's just like necessity is the mother of all invention. So they just basically, to your point, completely. I guess they aligned and said, okay, well, it's more than just agility and speed to deploy. I think what really that period created was a tolerance for risk and a tolerance for imperfection, saying, listen, it's not going to be perfect, but it's got to get out. And instead of tossing around, proof of concept after proof of concept and pilot after pilot, there's like, okay, we just got to do this, and it has to get out. Now, he would also argue that it was very hard on the organization, and would question to what point it would be replicable to maintain that sort of cadence in the future. But definitely some big lessons learned, and we've seen that roll out. That we've seen that with a bunch of other businesses that sort of did the same thing. Like, okay, well, we'll try this, we'll try that, and there was a lot of to use the term friction that could eventually be eliminated, but at least they started from something, and then they realized, okay, we need to rethink some of the operational elements of this. For instance, it's often not the technology that's the issue, it's the people that are called upon to deliver on that technology. And I'm sure we can get into that, but it's the technology piece was sort of the easy part. It was getting realigning the work, the workforce, or the people in that are involved in the different steps to rethink what they need to do to make the client happy in the end, or make the other coworkers more productive.
Yeah, I think you're right. It may have been or it will potentially go down into history as one of those moments in time where, as a customer and a consumer, we were quite tolerant because we understood our options were limited for the reasons that the pandemic brought around. But it must be tricky for organisations now to find the right balance, because there'll be a real desire to, I'm sure, pull back, to be less risk averse, put governance back in steps, but to go back to where they were and slow those processes down can't be sustainable in a world that, certainly from a retail point of view, needs to stay relevant and needs to move quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if they're going to go back. So, a lot of this change that was required, that was propelled by the acceleration, was the holdback wasn't at the executive level, right? So the most senior levels have known for a while that a lot of these changes were necessary. They just had a real challenge getting selling that down to, especially for the larger organizations, selling it down through all the layers, because the resistance to change obviously is always one of the biggest forces. But step one of any change management project is creating a sense of urgency, and these executives recognize the opportunity to and it was a legitimate urgent matter. So they basically capitalized on that. But beyond that, I think what that's done, and why we're not fully going back to the way things were, especially now that people have had a chance a bit to breathe. I know there's been, depending what part of the world you're in, there's different parts of this, and some are in tougher situations than others. But and not just part of the world, what industry you're in as well too, because or what vertical of the industry you're in, because if you're in fashion or versus sporting goods versus food, your realities could be very different. But the idea that the book, the subtitle of my book, The Race to Resilience, is this idea. What I'm really trying to communicate is we got everything, all the indicators are showing us that there are more crises to come. We're not one and done here. I think, be it again health related, or can it be climate related, or can it be even cyber related? I mean, there's organizations are going to be facing more and more. Let's call it high level challenges that we were clearly unprepared for, and I don't blame anybody for that. I don't think anybody could have anticipated what we've been through in the last 18 months. But the executive levels, the boards, the people that are really the ones sort of steering the ships need to recognize, okay, well, how do we? And this could go from supply chain all the way down to frontline, right? So how can we how can we be better prepared for whatever else is to come? Because we clearly weren't for this, and we can't afford to be unprepared for the next. And that's the race to resilience for me. And my narrative around this is recommending that organizations sort of point the ship towards a 50-50 world that says digital and physical, to develop those muscles equally, those organizational muscles equally, so that they can meet those challenges, be it physical or digital, head on, and not be vulnerable on either one, overly vulnerable to by being, let's say, 100% digital is not a better place to be, as far as I'm concerned, than 100% physical. So if they aim for that 50-50, then the chances are they're going to land in a place where they're going to have more resilience than where they are right now.
Yeah, and within both of those streams, clearly there's a big drive to becoming more automated, whether that be through initial contact with customers, process, whatever it might be. So there must be some things that, as part of your thinking, you've been doing around how you set kind of the right attributes in a world that is predominantly automated, or at least 50-60% more automated than today.
Yeah. I mean, step one is always, in terms of automation, is how can you replace the redundant work, or the low value work throughout the process, right? Throughout from supply chain to frontline. Like, so what are these steps that we can automate out that don't really create value through a human connection? And that's why day in, day out, we're getting examples of technologies, robotics, whatever you want, that are machine learning and solutions that automate conversations, robotics that automate product handling, all the way to checkout. So all those. We've been saying this for a while. Again, this is sort of part of the acceleration that I've seen in the last 18 months of, with self-checkout, for instance. That's, sort of semi-automated, but it's more automated than it was. And so we're seeing more and more examples of that. And I'd also put in that I'd automate. I think the automation piece, what's interesting and is also an empowerment portion of automation. So how can I use automation to make my workforce smarter, stronger, more agile, and more responsive, and all that stuff? So that, I think that's the piece. I think we often think about automation in the classical sense of the warehouse, the dark warehouse that has just robots flying around it, picking and packing. But the reality is, I think where the real automation, the value of automation is going to come is removing the low value, low consideration work away from the human workforce to empower them to do the things that create the most value. And that's where organizations can really, I think, lean into something important.
As customers, do you think we're more tolerant now of automation at the front end of retail, so the customer facing side coming out of the pandemic, than we were going in?
That's a really good question because I mean I was just at our local Costco here, and they've gone to like self checkout, right? And clearly are pushing in my grocery, and these are even our dollar stores here are more and more becoming self checkout, which is ironic. And you know these the three examples I just gave you. Yes, groceries toyed with self checkout, and even Walmart's been playing around with it here for years, but now they're stepping into it. Now, are they doing that from a place where they want to improve the customer experience, or is it this is purely a productivity thing for their end? Where first of all, we know hiring is really becoming a major issue. The two biggest issues on any executive's agenda right now is acquiring talent and supply chain, and automation can play a role in sort of lessening the burden on both. So they're going to invest in things like that, not necessarily just from a place of improving customer experience, because I think we could argue both sides of that. But it's more from just a productivity place and return on investment. So are we more tolerant as consumers now that we're being pushed to sort of check ourselves out because of just the way that things have everybody's kind of getting on that bandwagon? I think that's clearly happening. Does it make the experience necessarily better? I'm not convinced of that. So I don't think it was done in which is a dangerous place to be. And that's where things like Amazon and the technologies they're developing and others. I'm involved with McGill. We have a retail innovation lab at McGill University, which is using frictionless checkout as well, a different technology, not the same as Amazon's, for Circle K, which is the second largest convenience store chain in the world, and they're testing different ways of going about it too, because we know that checking our. I'll be interested to see the net promoter scores of after imposing these more and more of the self checkout on grocery and Costco and Walmart, and for small baskets for convenience, and sort of could make sense, because if I'm just walking out with 2-3 things, that's fine. But if I have a basket with 50 different things in it, do I really want to be scanning myself out? I mean, that item by item, versus like what Decathlon has with RFID, or again with Amazon Go with using computer vision. I think those are probably better consumer experiences than me having to scan barcode by barcode to get my basket out of Costco for 2 minutes faster than I would if I would have gone to deal with the longer line of dealing with the actual cashier.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's a piece around playing the, I suppose, pandemic card, if you like, around having less interaction with people reduces my risk of transmission, of catching and giving.
You think that's the argument, though, Simon? I mean, do you think that's really what they're thinking?
I think it's a cop out. Is what I think, but I think you could frame it that way if you so wish to.
Yeah, but then we're all touching. I know they're coming around and cleaning, but then we're all touching, more things. I don't know. I really think it comes from a place of productivity. To be quite honest, at first when I was, noticing this like 12 months ago, all these self checkouts showing up left and right in places like dollar stores and Costco, where I wasn't expecting necessarily to see them. I was sort of surprised at why are they investing in this now when we know that. Sort of this completely frictionless checkout technology is yes, still very expensive, especially the computer vision centered stuff, because the processing and just even the hardware that's required is pretty cost prohibitive unless you have access to really cheap capital like Amazon would have. But then, I was reminded by some people that, that know these things better than I do, that the return on investment on these self-checkout caches that you've had for years as well, too, in places like Tesco and all that, have been playing around with them. They ROI in like 6 months, like the hardware's paid off in like less than a year. So for them, it's sort of a stopgap while they're figuring out what's going to be the best way. They just knew they couldn't wait. Probably the 3 to 5 year window that's going to take to get really proper checkout technology, where we just forget about the need to go through a till. Same way that when we take a cab, and we walk out of the cab and the guy honks and, hey, you didn't pay because you're just so used to using Uber that you forgot that there's still cabs out there that you have to give your credit card and or, pay the driver. You sort of, so I think we're going to have that with stores in 3 to 5 years, probably. And again, another thing is probably being accelerated.
Yeah, we've done lots of measurement around SCO, and there's probably a 6 to 10 to 1 ratio of how many people you need to manage the SCOs versus you'd need on the checkout. There's all the, back to your net promoter score comment, there's all pieces around the frustration it causes if it doesn't recognize an item, it doesn't scan, the scales don't work. So from an experiential point of view, normally the last thing or the biggest impact on your shopping trip and the experience is the last thing you experience, right? Which is normally somebody at the checkout saying, hi, how you doing, hopefully, or not, to be left with a frustrating wrestle with a self-checkout that then somebody has to come and sort me out anyway. And I've even been in instances where it's not worked and they've said, I'll take you to a till and scan it through. So I feel like I've done it twice. Is only going to make your score go down, right? And it's interesting because it made me think, actually, when you were talking, I recall probably 4 or 5 years ago at NRF, the big thing there was tunnel payment. So you put all your goods on a belted lane, it went through a tunnel, and then said, you've got 87 items.
It was Alibaba, I think, that had that set up, right?
I've never seen it anywhere.
Yeah, no, but I remember seeing that tunnel at NRF, and I think it was their HEMA. It was sort of they were recreating a sort of small, just a small version of the tech stack for HEMA. Their grocery thing that they had in China was Alibaba. I remember a lot of people. Well, there was a couple of others. That's right. But yeah, it is sort of shocking that we're not further along with that. I mean, I know there's still some tests. Sobeys here, a grocery chain in Canada, is testing smart carts. So as you drop the thing in your grocery cart, it's already being scanned. So it is a particular point of friction that is kind of surprising that we still have that, and we're not further along. That's why I was sort of shocked when I saw the self-checkout things popping up left and right. I was like, to your point, I'm convinced it doesn't improve NPS scores. We could debate if that's the right measure or not, because I'm not fully on the NPS bandwagon, but it's still, I don't feel better about my experience saying, oh, I'm so glad that they gave me that. Especially when there's big lineups, there's big queues at those things as well too. If there was zero queue at those self-checkout and when everybody, then I would be like, okay, then that makes, it's a good trade-off. I'm ready to put in a little extra work to get out of there more quickly, but it's not even that. I mean, I almost prefer like the smartphone scan thing would almost work better for me. Like, give me an app. I know Walmart, I think through Sam's, has been playing around with this for a while too. And what's always interesting is I was telling somebody about this experience because we were talking about sort of the trust factor too. And there was I remember hearing the founder of a sort of really hip juice concept in New York called Dirty Lemon. And they had this store, this little spot where you could literally walk in. And these are not cheap juices. They're like $5-6 juices, like premium. And they had a fridge set up and you'd pay by SMS. And this was already a couple of years ago. And they claimed that their shrink was like less than 5%, like over 95% of people were, and there was no like security tagging. There was no, any of that stuff. Right. It was just like, it was all done, I guess, in good faith. And based on in that, and at 90, like that 5% shrink was something that he argued, said, listen, that's a good, that's a pretty decent cost of doing business if that's where it maintains. So if 95%, I don't know, in grocery maybe that 5% would be too much to handle, and wouldn't have the margins of a premium juice. But I just always kind of thought about that and saying, like, to what point do we just need to put a little more trust into the consumer and saying that they're going to do, they're not going to be out there not everybody's going to be out there to grab, to fool the system. So anyways, we'll see where it goes, but it's clearly accelerating. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And are there any other attributes you'd add to this more automated world?
It's going to be interesting as well to see through the same lens of the staffing challenges. What other parts of the discovery can they automate? We know that physical stores, they went a couple of years back, went through this phase where they were trying to put a lot of screens in the store so that the customer could find information without necessarily having to rely on people, I guess, on associates, and that didn't really work out. I think the consensus back then was when people walk into a physical space after having spent good parts of their days on different screens already, wasn't necessarily the first experience they were looking to live, to come into a store and deal with one more screen. Especially as obviously smartphones were that probably the best screen to have if you're going to use a screen in a store, not necessarily one that's on a wall or on a stand. But but I still think there's going to be need for that. I think there's still need to sort of automate some of the discovery in the spaces, but I don't have any great examples of that right now that I've seen since that phase of smart mirrors and everything else that never really materialized. But empowering the front line, making the front line more productive and engaging, and not just in terms of making them more cost effective, but I think just more increasing the customer experience. I think that's seeing tools. I'm seeing a lot of tools. Custom call it clienteling. So any kind of tool that basically levels the playing field for the front line to empower them to the same level as the customers that are walking in. I think there's still a lot of interesting opportunities there, and I'm seeing more and more technologies that are stepping into that space.
And that's clearly going to change the role of frontline workers, isn't it? So my assumption is you'll need people that potentially are more tech savvy and maybe even more sales based trained, rather than people who are there to stack stock on shelves.
Right. Well, and that's going back to my point around automating sort of the redundant. That's what we're hoping for, right? That's what they're trying to get. And even when Amazon Go started, and everybody's like, "Oh, well, we're look at all this job loss this is going to create by removing the cashiers, and if we automate the shelf, the stocking and all these other things." But if we could just take those people, and we know they're harder and harder to hire, anyways, and make them more. And this is something I've been talking about for years. Is we don't need order takers or people to just scan barcodes. We need brand ambassadors. We need people that really are involved and interested and dare I say passionate, which might be asking a lot, but then depending on what category you are, it's probably easier to be passionate about things like photography or sneakers or organic food than it would be to some of the more generic things out there. But I often come back to an early example that a friend of mine, Kyle Nell, who was leading Lowe's, which is a large hardware chain in North America. They were amongst the first to use these robots. They call them Lowe's bots that were built out in California. And the idea of these bots was basically to, assist the client with the sort of the mundane, low consideration stuff, which is, can you help me find where I could get this screw, or what aisle are the hammers in, or, where what's the price of this sheet of plywood? And this robot in like 20 some odd different languages could basically support that, and was mobile. So it could actually bring you to in front of the screw you were looking for, because it could scan. You just basically put the screw down on, and it would scan and recognize exactly what screw you needed. And Kyle was telling us that how, we said, well, are the employees going to be jealous, or not jealous, or upset about this because it's sort of replacing their job? And he said, to the contrary, this is the part of the job they hated doing in the first place. They much prefer, or at least the employees we want, much prefer to talk about how to build the deck than which screw it's going to take. So that's what we want to free up the front line for, and then to have those people that are more invested and interested, which I'm sure also increases retention and job satisfaction. If you're not spending your days running around showing people where screws are, but talking about their projects and how they could build a better deck, I think is a lot more interesting and a lot more valuable for everybody. So that's where automation comes in. My friends here in Montreal, another quick example from Aldo Group. I mean, they started off with they had a project where they had these screens for customers to help them see what was in stock and sort of translate their online to in-store experience. And they quickly realized that the customers weren't really interested in that screen, but the staff were very interested in it. And then they were actually able to use that same platform to automate that the shoes would come out. So they would have people that were dedicated just to bringing the shoes to the front, so that the salespeople wouldn't be spending their time, as you traditionally seen a shoe store experience, running back and forth to the stock room to get shoes. They would just stay in the front, and they had their iPods with the app, and they would just basically have the shoes come out to them, and it made them much more productive, and has removed a part of the job they didn't really care for, running back and forth to the stockroom to get shoes, different shoe sizes brought out to the client, and it just allowed them to have a much better conversation with the client or clients. It also led them to be able to maybe deal with more clients at once. So those, I think, are sort of the examples that we're going to see more and more of.
Amazing. It's great example. So I think we'll pause there, Carl. I'm sure we could natter away all day. If people want to find out more about you, get hold of a copy of the book, where's the best place for them to do that?
So as part of this book project, when I'm saying being a bit unique, it's uniquely available on my website. So studiorx.ca or .world, actually both point to and you just click on the Great Acceleration, and you can get a digital download, or you can order a physical book, which also I have what I call a VIP experience, which allows you to have the book and an hour of my time to sort of unpack the concepts in the book and how they might apply more directly to your reality. So studiorx.ca, and I'm pretty easy to find, Simon, as you probably know by now. So yep. LinkedIn is probably the best way, and I'm pretty accessible.
Awesome. We'll put those links to your LinkedIn profile and the website in the show notes. A final question from me before we close. What's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
Wow, that's a big question, and been given a lot because I've needed a lot of advice over the years. But I think maybe it's just sort of what's developed my mindset around this notion of relevance and resilience, and just not fearing change, right? So understanding the opportunities that those create for the right reasons. So I think, embracing change, or I guess my mantra is sort of, the only thing that's constant is change. Yep. So recognizing that and not fearing it, but seeing the opportunities that can create for your business, for yourself personally. I think it just makes everything a lot more fulfilling. But it's not easy, and especially when you have you've had an organization, or you have an organization that's been very successful. Recognizing that need to change could be pretty intimidating. But for me, I think embracing it and taking it for the opportunities it can create, I think is a big lesson.
Amazing. Wise words to close. Thanks, Carl. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate you taking the time out to come on.
Been fabulous. Thanks, Simon.